I start, first of all, propaganda. I mean, who wants to talk about propaganda? That's kind of a provocative subject, but hopefully it'll be interesting. It's an overlook. It's historical highlights. There's a lot I left out, and it's my point of view and my perspective. There might be different perspectives, which is why we will have a period of questions and discussion, a little bit, just a brief period, after the presentation. It's also a good time to go back and get a drink. We do have also a small animated film that if you want to watch after the presentation, I highly recommend it. It's very powerful, but pretty brutal, and I go over it in the presentation. Another disclaimer is there's a good possibility that I may incorrectly pronounce words and names. So have mercy on me. There's a lot. Okay, so propaganda. Propaganda is a device that elicits an emotion, brings attention to an issue or a cause, and is a way to persuade an audience. Propaganda derives from the Latin verb propagare, which means to spread. I'm having a hard time reading this. I gotta read this a little bit. Okay. I hope you can still hear me. I hope this is still good. Okay, so propaganda derives from the Latin verb propagare, which means to spread, extend, or increase. So Pope Gregory XV in 1622 established the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith to counter the Protestant Reformation by spreading Catholic beliefs. By World War I, the idea of propaganda evolved to describe the spreading of more deceptive and sometimes misleading information by governments and various groups in order to emotionally manipulate audiences. So here are the definitions of propaganda. But the two that we're concerned about most is number 3, A and B. To cause to spread out and affect a greater number or greater area, so to extend, or to foster growing knowledge of, familiarity with, or acceptance of something such as an idea or belief, so to publicize. No matter how harmless, gotta go back. Touchy. No matter how harmless it appears, propaganda should always be scrutinized, as it promotes decision-making and action based on limited, sometimes false, information and emotional appeal. Propaganda targets and manipulates our emotions without the benefit of two-way communication or fact-based debate. And that's by Melinda McPeak. So we're going to start with the Russian Civil War. It started in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution and mostly culminated by 1922 with the Bolsheviks in power. The Bolsheviks considered institutions, the monarchy, churches, provisional governments, and other factors as impediments to their cause. And you can see that forceful forward march of the Bolsheviks, and what's standing in the way is the Russian Orthodox Church in this particular poster. Soviet constructionism was a rejection of established traditional art into a more utilitarian approach that promised radical change. The use of predominantly red, black, and white colors, bold geometric block letters, sometimes italicized to indicate movement, and abstract diagonal lines presented persuasive images that appealed to an audience of largely illiterate factory workers and peasants. Artists Alexander Rodchenko and L. Lazitsky pioneered the typography and design of early constructionist posters, and their own work focused on strong visual elements. Alexander Rodchenko's piece, Pure Red Color, Pure Yellow Color, and Pure Blue Color, is a utilitarian, minimalist painting, the antithesis to representational art, and a statement about the philosophy of materialism. L. Lazitsky centered more on graphic art and topography. His piece is titled Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge, the red symbolizing Bolsheviks and the white as those opposed to Bolshevism. He was part of a group embracing suprematism, the use of geometric forms to invoke pure feeling and minimalist, non-objective art. This poster represents the Soviet government's image of agricultural collectivism. The one on the left reads, "In our collective farm, there is no room for priests and kulaks." Both posters utilize a low angle shot to make the figures seem more imposing. So that's underneath, looking up, right? That's going to come up later also. The poster on the right shows a rising sun and the farmer plowing over the remnants of the autocratic government. The posters were created as propaganda for Stalin's first 5-year plan starting in 1929. Kulaks were farm landowners living in rural Soviet Union, Ukraine, and Siberia, sometimes wealthy enough to hire laborers on their farms. The rules kept changing, though, as to how much land was too much land, how many cows were too many cows, how much grain did the farmers really owe the government. The Bolsheviks attempted to confiscate grain, animals for meat, seize and redistribute private property, and install their authority. One goal was to eliminate the kulaks as a capitalistic social class, and the methods employed directly led to mass famine in Ukraine, called the Holodomor, death by hunger, in the years 1932 to 1934. The estimation is that up to 4 million Ukrainians starved to death, were sent to prison camps, or executed. Call to duty. Call to duty is a stylistic tool using foreshortening to emotionally appeal to a demand for personal loyalty, service, volunteerism. The style is realistic and forceful. A simple, iconic image. It can include other subliminal objects to add to the idea of authority. Another style, or another word for this particular style, is called zakplakat, which means object poster, where you have something centered to command your attention. The image of a pointing finger was first created by Alfred Leet in 1914 and depicted Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War, encouraging men to join the British Army. And then you have the Italian version, you have a 1942 war poster, and then of course you have Uncle Sam. That was created in 1917. You don't just have pointing fingers, though. You have other ways to demand loyalty or action, ways to rally citizens to a cause, an awareness, or serve as warnings. And so you're familiar with some of these, but these are a lot of the posters that have been used throughout time to rally people. Food. Okay, smoking. Okay, the next one is a poster called "We Smite the Lazy Workers," combining photo montage, simple geometric lines, movement, and color. This poster portrays an idealized, strong working class and shames citizens who resisted. This poster was created in 1931 in a more Art Deco style and is a precursor to socialist realism, a state-mandated art established in 1932 under Stalin, depicting realism to represent socialist ideals. So you can see the movement, you can see the force, and you can also see the influences of L. Lissitzky in his abstract art, early Soviet construction art. Okay, I was really conflicted about the next slide because it's controversial. It's controversial to this day. In fact, so I'm like, should I not? But it is a part of history. It played into Russian history. It played into German history, and thought, well, I'm gonna post it. And it's from a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So Germany needed a scapegoat after World War I to deflect citizens away from military failures, economic crisis, various revolutions. Protocols was published in 1905 in Russia, but quickly spread to other countries, including the United States. Henry Ford published articles from it in the Dearborn Independent, and later published a book called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, which he distributed to car dealerships across the country. The book is still circulated around the world to this day. Protocols was highly influential in Germany with the rise of Nazism, and Hitler quoted from it many times in his book, Mein Kampf. So if you don't know what Protocols is about, it was a series of meetings of the Jewish elders that wanted to, the conspiracies that they wanted to take over the world. They wanted to dominate the world. And so, like I said, it's still in publication to this day. Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933 and almost immediately took control of most of the German media. By 1934, independent journalism and media outlets were suppressed and instructed by the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, administered under Joseph Goebbels, to distribute only state-approved information to the citizens of Germany. And that is Goebbels right next to Hitler in this. German media portrayed Jews as an inferior race, traitors, and responsible for the plight that Germany was in after World War I. Stereotypical cartoon caricatures proliferated throughout Germany, fueling hate and fear among the citizens. The little book on the right is called Der Giftpilz. I'm probably saying it wrong, but it translates to the poisonous mushroom. And what it means is that mushrooms, good mushrooms and bad poisonous mushrooms, can sometimes look alike, and you need to be able to tell the difference between the two of those. And so this was published for children. Large murals of the illustrations from the book were presented at exhibitions at banks, community halls, and throughout the country. And then the picture on the bottom, the photograph, is from Crystal Night, when, as you know, a lot of defacing of businesses and homes and such were happening at that particular time. In contrast, depictions of the Aryan race were portrayed as fair, strong, and noble figures of soldiers, workers, athletes. Again, you have that Sachplakat object poster, which emphasized a simple, powerful image with little or no text. And here's another example of the 1936 Olympic Games, that proud Aryan race that they depicted, and emphasis on a strong central figure. The most popular typeface in early Nazi propaganda posters was Fraktur, which means broken, which evolved from black letter or Gothic letters. Fraktur was introduced as a new typeface by Emperor Maximilian I, designed in the 1530s by Hieronymus André, a colleague of Albrecht Dürer. The typeface was intended to decorate an almost 12-foot-high print called the Triumphal Arch, displaying stories of the figures depicted throughout. Albrecht Dürer and his students illustrated 195 woodblocks to create the piece, and it was intended to be used throughout Germany as a propaganda tool to promote the many triumphs of Emperor Maximilian I. Amazing how many people want to leave a legacy, right? The typeface was further popularized by the Protestant Reformation for printing German Bibles and other literature, as opposed to the Catholic use of Antigua typeface. Eventually, Hitler realized that Fraktur was hard to read and conveniently declared that it was a Jewish typeface. And here's a close-up of one of the panels in the letters. You can kind of see what the letters are like. Familiar, right? We all know, we've seen a lot of that. In 1941, Fraktur was abandoned and German publications initially transitioned into Antigua, as was commonly used by other countries. But increasingly, publications turned to Futura. I have a hard time with that word, I don't know. Futura. It's one of those words. Typeface for a modern, clean look. Futura was designed by Paul Renner and released in 1927. Renner was a vocal opponent of the Nazi regime and a proponent of modernism. He was forced into internal exile and dismissed from his teaching position. And initially, Futura, how do you say it? Futura. Was labeled as degenerate, but eventually the clean style proved to be appealing. based entirely on simple geometric forms, triangles, squares, and near circles. NASA used it for the moon landing, and in the middle you can see a lot of companies, people, movies, magazines that still use that typeface in their work. The House of German Art was built by the government and was intended to exhibit only Nazi-approved art that should be anchored in the realities of blood and history. On July 18, 1937, the Great German Art Exhibition opened with art depicting workers, family life, classical Greek and Roman-style statues, nudes, battle scenes, and landscapes. Here's an example of some of the statues and paintings that were in that first exhibit. And down on the lower right, you have that iconic, it was called the Standard Bearer, Hitler as a knight in shining armor. And then they also liked paintings of peasants and family life. And I'm sure most of you know that Hitler was an aspiring artist himself, and this is some of his work. And so of course he's going to like art that's traditional, because he was pretty traditional. People say that he was just a really terrible artist, and I'm like, he wasn't so bad, you know? His architectural renderings and stuff like that. I was intrigued by the one on the lower right, because I have seen that a lot, and I thought, I'm going to go on a hunt and see if I can find the elk with the frosty breath online. And I did, a lot. So that was just a little rabbit trail that I took for my own satisfaction, okay? Okay, this is another hard one. Entartata Kunst means degenerate art. This is a stylized Futura typeface to make this poster, and Hitler had rejected approximately 90 pieces of work from the Great German Exhibition, declaring them as not pure enough. Goebbels responded by hastily putting together the Degenerate Art Exhibition as a propaganda show. This was intended to act as a contrast to the highly superior art at the German Art Exhibition. The show opened July 19, 1937, the day after the Great German Exhibition opening, and attracted over 2 million visitors. Now the 2 million visitors, there were some that fully intended to go to the Degenerate Art exhibit to mock the work, and then there were some that were very intrigued by it. So you had a mixed visitors there. German expressionism and abstract modernism had been popular after World War I during the Weimar Republic. The emotional stress of the war, the aftermath of poverty, political and social unrest, and despair contributed to new ways of expressing art. Modernist artists were wined and dined, and their work was highly collectible, including many high-ranking officials. Under Hitler's new regime, their work was now labeled as degenerate. Many artists, seeing the writing on the wall, fled the country. And the lesson there is the tide always turns. It always has, it always will, right? So I want to highlight a couple of the artists. These are some of the works that were in the Degenerate Art exhibit. I want to highlight Kata Kollwitz. She was, and this is her work right there on the left, as you can tell. She was a German citizen with a strong anti-war sentiment. She depicted human suffering and used black and white mediums to not distract from the reality of the starving years of World War I in Berlin, which included her son being killed in the war in Belgium at the time. So Hitler's regime considered her work to be a real downer, and they didn't want to give her the recognition that she deserved, actually. Another artist that I wanted to highlight is Otto Dix. He was an adherent of a movement called the New Objectivity, and the Museum of Modern Art, New York, called his War Cripple series Caustic Portraits of German Post-War Society. So Otto Dix was a soldier in the First World War, and he did receive a lot of wounds during the war, and he just had a very cynical attitude about post-World War I Germany and a lot of people that had survived the war less intact. You guys recognize Edward Munch? He did The Scream, and then another example of German expressionism. And then one person that was in the exhibit, they actually had 33 pieces of art in the degenerate art exhibit, and that was Emil Nold. And he was actually a dedicated Nazi, an anti-Semite, but his work was degenerate. So he was included, 33 pieces, that's the most pieces anybody had in that exhibit. Not only visual art were singled out as being degenerate, stereotypical caricatures of blacks were displayed, and American jazz music was banned from Germany at the time. Here's the line to see the opening of the exhibit. And the art was arranged chaotically. The walls were written with mocking and demeaning slogans, some pointing to the fact that some of the work was bought by museums, sometimes using taxpayer money, during extreme economic hardships during and after World War I. So they purposely put the paintings up from the ceiling to the floor, jumbled them all together, and you can see the writing on the wall, so to speak, the slogans and demeaning words, Hitler, and a very happy Goebbels, because doing this exhibit may have even saved his neck because of Hitler not liking a lot of the work that was in the original German exhibit, right? Now, the purpose of propaganda, Hitler explained, is not continually to produce interesting changes for a few little masters, but to convince, that means to convince the masses. The masses, however, with their inertia, always need a certain time before they are ready even to notice a thing, and they will lend their memories only to the thousandfold repetition of the most simple ideas. This is Leni Riefenstahl. She was commissioned by Hitler to create a documentary called Triumph of the Will. She actually got a Lifetime Achievement Award in Los Angeles in 1997, which of course was a very controversial thing. You can see that old typeface that they used. So the in Triumph of the Will, the documentary starts with shots of Hitler's plane arriving in Nuremberg. Excerpts by Wim von Welsen state, the plane glides through the sky as he descends like an angel through the clouds, its shadow sailing across the nation's landmarks in architecture. The descent of the plane as it joins the electrified crowds of soldiers and civilians, parents and children, all welcoming their leader with bright smiles. Riefenstahl rapidly cuts across the sea of hands raised in a Nazi salute, children chanting their adoration as the plane door finally opens, and Hitler himself emerges with a glimmer in his eyes and a smile from ear to ear as the crowd roars his name. Some of the camera techniques utilized in the film, and we already talked about the low angle shots. So that's heroic framing. Sometimes you would even get into a pit to even exacerbate that particular viewpoint. Symbolic imagery. High angle and aerial shots combined with immense architectural shots. She wanted everything to look imposing, unstoppable, regimented compliance and enthusiasm. And so she also incorporated moving shots for action dynamics. And she wanted to display the hearts and loyalty of the youth. You have to get the hearts and minds of the youth, right? So children are most important to persuade an audience. Those who would be gods refashion themselves into images the viewers would have them be. Disney Studios, Warner Studios, and other well-known studios rallied to join the war effort. Famous cartoon characters depicted caricatures of Hitler, Mussolini, and Emperor Hirohito. They promoted loyalty. They encouraged you to buy war bonds. They demeaned the enemy. They called you to do your part. And again, I'm always amazed because that image of, you see, Emperor Hirohito, that image persisted well into my childhood of Japanese people with the slanty eyes and the buck teeth and all of that. Another example. Even well-loved children's authors like Dr. Seuss participated. Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941. Bunkers were built on the West Coast, and inland airports were constructed as precautionary measures, thus why we have the Minden Airport, by the way. President Roosevelt issued an executive order in 1942 that Japanese Americans needed to be sequestered, especially on the West Coast. They were gathered and sent to hastily built internment camps. When I worked in Reno at a senior independent living place, there were 3 residents there who had all lived in Japanese internment camps. So when I talked to the first lady and I asked her how she felt about it, she was still angry. She was so angry, she did not want to talk about it. The second woman was pretty nonchalant. She just shrugged and said, well, I was too young, I really don't remember. But it was the third woman's response that was interesting to me because it was unexpected to me. She goes, well, I just felt that it was what America needed to do at the time, and we were doing our part by going to these camps. But she also told me at the same time that she had 2 brothers in the army who were at that time fighting in Italy. Mine Okubo and Kiora Obata were well-known and respected artists. Both were connected to the University of California in Berkeley. Okubo as a former student and Obata as a professor of art. He is best known for his beautiful prints and paintings of Yosemite. She is mostly known for her book, Citizen 13660, a collection of 198 drawings and text about her experiences in internment camps. Both were initially interned at Tanforan Camp, a former racetrack in San Bruno, California, and later transferred to Topaz Internment Camp in Delta, Utah. Both artists were instrumental in founding and teaching art classes to hundreds of detainees in the camps. Gretchen Kell, UC Berkeley, wrote, on New Year's Day at Topaz in 1942, Obata asked his students there to strengthen themselves by looking outside, beyond their plight, at the beautiful mountains. They can't be moved, no matter how many people try. The People's Republic of China was established in 1949. Borrowing Soviet propaganda poster styles to promote Mao Zedong's leadership, party ideology, and industrialization, posters were intended for a largely illiterate population. Mao was presented as a benevolent father and wise teacher. His face was typically painted in rosy hues with a happy demeanor. Sometimes he was surrounded by rays of lights or a halo-like glow that radiated out to include enraptured children or workers. And again, children are always an important factor for emotional manipulation. Animal Farm was written in 1945 by George Orwell. In 1954, the CIA covertly funded and produced the film version of the book in Great Britain. Tony Shaw, the author of The Cold War of Hollywood, wrote, they didn't use Hollywood because they wanted some distance. Using a British company made it look less like American propaganda. It was the first full-length animated feature film in Great Britain. And if you don't know what it is, it's about totalitarianism, and this was during the Cold War that it came out. So I'm going to veer slightly, a little detour into media manipulation. Even though this has all been that, with the proliferation of televisions, news networks strive to have the most exciting, dramatic, and attractive stories. They competed for the finest reporters, highest rated equipment, and largest number of viewers. To succeed, they had to do something unprecedented, on-site coverage of the war in Vietnam. For the first time in American history, the news from the front lines was brought straight into the living room, and that was written by Maddie Ward. The Vietnam War was considered the first television war. By 1968, there were over 600 journalists on the ground in Vietnam. Daily death tolls were reported, with 1968 documented as the worst, with 16,899 deaths. Following the Tet Offensive in January 1968, Walter Cronkite significantly shifted from his usual objective reporting to a personal commentary on February 27, 1968, stating that to suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic yet unsatisfactory conclusion. It is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out, then, will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy. Oops, I got a page out of order. And did the best they could. Walter Cronkite, generally considered a trusted voice in our country, widely influenced public opinion, and was a catalyst for normalizing personal opinions in news broadcasting. So, we have these images. This image is by John Olson at the age of 20 in Vietnam. It's an iconic image. It was actually in Life magazine, a 2-page spread of this particular photograph. But there are different narratives with this photograph. So he says that this person on there was Alvin Grantham, who got shot in the chest and survived and lives to this day. So all official accounts of this particular photograph say that it's Alvin Grantham. You can Google it, it's even on Google, okay? But another narrative has emerged in the years since then. They've tried to figure out who a lot of these people are in the photographs, if they're still alive or not alive. And so this photograph is Don McCullen. He was a reputable British photographer, and he was shooting the very same day. And he swears that this person is James Blaine, who died later that same day. And so a snapshot is just that. A snapshot is a snap moment can be turned into a whole narrative. And we see that with photographs, don't we? A snapshot can become a whole narrative surrounding that particular camera shot. Quoting from Ruth Quest from her article, The Ethics of Photography, Truth, Manipulation, and Media Narratives. She asks, how can photographs be a real source of truth if they are only a fraction or slice of time? She quotes Neil Postman, one of my favorite persons, and he suggests that we are a society that thinks in images, not words. And then she continues, I believe that we are a society that now sees images but cannot know the full context because of our dependence on imagery. This is only getting worse with short attention spans because of social media and the overload of information. AI is now going to make this 10 times worse with mass manipulated images. There's no truth in those images, with almost no arguments to support a debate promising it. If we look at traditional image making through cameras, both film and digital, were we ever telling the truth in the first place, or was it just perspective? The Gulf War. The Gulf War in 1990 was televised in such a way that it was called the video game war. Much of the footage was shot from cockpits and showed precision strikes. Some other manipulated images that came out during the Gulf War are these kinds of images. Strategically placed toys in the middle of rubble in cities that have been demolished. because again, it's about the children. You want that emotional tug on your heart. And the other day, I was reading an article about Chernobyl, how photographers are going back to take pictures of what things look like now. And lo and behold, look what I found. Strategically placed gas masks and toys scattered about. So, Neil Postman, I do not mean to imply that television news deliberately aims to deprive Americans of a coherent, contextual understanding of their world. I mean to say that when news is packaged as entertainment, that is the inevitable result. And in saying that the television news show entertains but does not inform, I am saying something far more serious than that we are being deprived of authentic information. I am saying we are losing our sense of what it means to be well informed. Ignorance is always correctable, but what shall we do if we take ignorance to be knowledge? And then Daniel Horston wrote a book in 1961 called The Image, a guide to pseudo-events, and he actually coined the term pseudo-events, which I suppose nowadays we would say fake news or disinformation. He said they vie with one another in offering attractive, informative accounts and images of the world. They are free to speculate on the facts, to bring new facts into being, to demand answers to their own contrived questions. Okay, so I'm going to take us out of this detour and into Japan. When I think of Japan, I think of a lot of things, but I also think of the best of animation. Many photos, let me get a drink first before I get into this. Many photos of the August 6th and 9th, 1945 damage from 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were suppressed or confiscated by the military for months and years before they were released. Initially, most official photos were of damage to buildings, but not much coverage of human suffering. In 1974, a completely unplanned organic movement began when a hibakusha, which means survivor of the atomic bomb, visited the Hiroshima office of the Japan Broadcasting Corporation, or NHK, to give them a picture he had drawn of a traumatic scene from the aftermath of the atomic bomb that he personally experienced. NHK then put out a call for other paintings and drawings from survivors, and thousands came in from all over the country. It was a breakthrough because hibakushas were shunned and discriminated against, since it was feared the radiation was infectious and could contaminate others. There was great shame and revulsion towards survivors, and another name put on them was the stained people. After collecting the art, all of it personal recollections, an exhibit was held in Hiroshima in 1975 at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. John Hersey, who wrote the essay Hiroshima in 1946, said that hibakusha's art were, quote, more moving than any book of photographs of the horror could be, because what is registered is what has been burned into the minds of the survivors. So some of the art that has come in from the survivors, these are images that were at the exhibit. I don't have more information on this particular person. This is Suko Sumamoto, who was 37 at the time. A mother calls to her child from the bridge. Hideo Kimura was a school student, and his first picture shows the students walking along the river with the Enola Gay overhead dropping the bomb. The picture on the right is the aftermath. These are middle school children as well, who died and were stacked like timber in a round circle in the front doors of their school. This exhibit inspired Renzo and Seiyoko Kinoshita to create the animated short film Picadon. Picadon means flash boom, in 1978. It was the first animated documentary film to directly address the bombing of Hiroshima. And we do have a copy of it, and after questions or getting drinks or whatever, if you want to see it, it's incredibly powerful and pretty brutal, but it's only about 7 or 8 minutes long. So we'll play that for you. So here's a couple of scenes from the movie. Starts out with a little boy with his paper airplane, which is symbolic of the Enola Gay. Here's the Enola Gay approaching. This is an actual diagram of the city while the bomb is being dropped. This is when the wind hits. Here are some other scenes from it. And again, they were inspired by the paintings and drawings that were in the exhibit, and they included some of those in their movie. I think they're from the actual drawings. And again, pretty brutal stuff, very graphic. Next we have Barefoot Gen, which was released in 1983, written and illustrated by Kiichi Nakazawa, who was a Japanese manga artist and also a hibakusha himself. And it's a kind of an iconic picture, the girl with the umbrella. The girl with the balloon, and that comes up in a little while too. Probably in a different reference, but still. And then in 1988, Grave of the Fireflies was released. It dealt with the survival of 2 orphaned siblings after the bombing of Kobe, Japan. It is considered by some critics to be one of the greatest animation films of all times, put out by Ghibli Studios. Japanese animation regarding the bombings was and is an effective way to reach, educate, and connect with a younger audience. On August 13, 1961, the German Democratic Republic in East Germany started constructing the Berlin Wall. Initially, it consisted of barbed wire, but was quickly replaced by 2 concrete walls, 27 miles separating East and West Berlin, and the whole barrier approximately 96 miles in length. It held over 300 guard towers and included a wide death strip. The German Democratic Republic government called it the anti-fascist protection rampart. Antifa Schießtischer Schutzwall, or Antifa for short. And the western side called it the Wall of Shame. The eastern side was completely drab and sterile, but the western side began to be used as a canvas for slogans and various sentiments from around the world. It was considered a subversive act to paint on the wall, and artists had to paint quickly and discreetly to avoid the East German border control. So even though there was a west side of the wall, a few feet of it was still considered Eastern German territory. In 1984, Terry Noir, along with Christophe Emmanuel Boucher, emerged as leading pioneer artists of the wall and devoted each day painting segments. They considered their work to be subversive acts to counter the oppressive and sad reality of the Cold War. Noir called his work fast form manifesto, work that must be done quickly in dangerous situations. He said, "You need 2 ideas and 3 colors." It was a way for me to show people that this mythical wall was not built forever and could be changed. They both got their supplies from painting projects or houses that had been painted. They didn't have their own supplies, and they just used whatever they were able to get. So you see his work at the bottom on the upper right and lower right. If any of you have ever seen Wim Wenders' movie, Wings of Desire, it's a German movie dealing with an angel that wants to become a human. But he did the most amazing scenes showing you the juxtaposition, the contrast between the east side and the west side of the Berlin Wall. And he highlighted Terry Noir's work in his movie. It's a pretty interesting movie. Badachow is a Chinese-Australian artist and a human rights activist. He says, cartoons and portraits can create a unified visual symbol which can help spread the message and attract sustained attention in order to create pressure from public opinion. Maybe this pressure can improve the situation for those who are imprisoned, as well as comfort the family members of the persecuted. So you have various images. You have the COVID virus. The middle one is a surveillance camera to signify the extreme surveillance of Chinese citizens in China. The one on the right is a Tibetan priest. And Communist China persecutes and is trying to eradicate the Tibetan culture. And a lot of the kids are forced to go to Chinese schools where, just like how we talk about, we had Native Americans in the schools and we want them to assimilate, the same thing is happening in China with Tibetans. And then the upper right one are Uyghur Muslims. And Uyghur Muslims is another group of people that Communist China would like to eradicate. And so a lot of Uyghur Muslims live in virtual, actual concentration camps where they employ slave labor to provide a lot of the cheap goods that we get from China. So the Uyghur Muslim situation is big. And so the next person is Shamsia Hassani. She's the first female Afghanistan street artist. She paints women without mouths to symbolize the enforced silence, lack of freedom, and restricted voices faced by women in Afghan society. The missing mouth signifies that their voices hold no weight, while the closed eyes represent a desire to ignore surrounding pain and the difficulty of seeing a positive future. I did copy that from AI, so. But she says, with making graffiti, I want to cover all bad memories of war from people's minds, with colors to cover all bad elements of war. I believe there are many who forget all the tragedies women face in Afghanistan. That is why I use my paintings as a means to remind people. I want to highlight the matter in the society with paintings reflecting women in burqas everywhere. And I try to show them bigger than what they are in reality and in modern forms, shaped in happiness, movement, maybe stronger. I try to make people look at them differently. And then we come to Banksy. So, Banksy. Again, you have that image of a girl with a balloon, but it's released. I don't know if he was inspired by Barefoot Gen, but I'm not really sure. The lower one, you have the napalm girl. If you guys remember that iconic image from the Vietnam War, she's hand in hand with, what is it, corporate America, consumer America? I'm not entirely sure of the message, but speaking of consumerism, then you have Che Guevara on the right. So I took another rabbit trail, and I go, I wonder, here's a question. When does what is subversive art eventually become branding? Because it seems to me that almost everything that is subversive eventually becomes mainstream. So I thought I would check into that, and these are some of the things I came up with, taken from the famous photo by Alberto Corda in 1960. You have Che Guevara merchandise. I especially like the one in the lower right, Che Vegan. The vegan revolution. Okay? So, we Americans seem to know everything about the last 24 hours, but very little of the last 60 centuries or the last 60 years. I want to give a plug for Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. It was written in the mid-'80s about media, about images, about television, but you can easily exchange social media for television. It has the same message, probably even more relevant today than even when he wrote his book. I have included some sources, if you want to screenshot any of those sources to take a deeper dive. I didn't include everything because I just didn't have any more room. So I'll leave these up here and I can open it up if anybody has any questions or comments. It's also a good time to go back and get a drink, and then I hope you'll hang out to watch that short. It's only about 7 or 8 minutes long of Picadon, but it's brutal. It's kind of brutal, but heads up. So anybody have any questions? Tabitha is going to help me facilitate this if things get out there. Any